This is why I don't record live. All right, welcome to the show. My name is Chad, and today my guest is cartoonist Brian Anderson, who has two new graphic novels coming out, and so we're gonna talk. We're gonna talk to him, find out about him and his books. So let me bring him in, and we'll get this started. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Chad? Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for taking the time, and I'm glad that we were able to get this scheduled because I got the books, and I have this one with me. The other one must be MIA because my son got a hold of it. So,
Oh, you will hopefully
so
won't see that for a while.
yeah, hopefully. But before we get talking about the books, tell me a little bit about yourself. You're, as a cartoonist, as a read you read comics, and when did you start kind of getting into comic strips or comics, and how did that influence your decision to get to this?
Yeah, the short version of the long journey. Yeah, my parents told me I started drawing when I was 2, so I think I always had an inclination in a path towards comics. And then when I was real little, obviously, like everybody, I loved the comics in the newspaper. But my grandmother had saved my father's comics from the 40s and the 50s. So when I was real little, I got exposed to, he had the first collection of Peanuts from the early 50s, like 52. And so that was a very different comic than the newspaper Sunday Peanuts that we're all kind of used to today. That was very formative because when you're a little kid, like 5 or 6, and you see that difference in what you know of Snoopy and the Peanuts, and then you see those original strips, that was kind of, I think, earth-shattering. That, and he had a collection of New Yorker cartoons with Charles Addams, who became instantly my favorite when I was like 5 years old. And then it was just from there, it was just reading and everything, books, comics. I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, where we had That's Entertainment, which is a phenomenal comic book store. So I was very lucky that I had access to any kind of comics that I wanted. And then from there, I just kept pursuing it. And then in 2005 or 2004, I launched Dog Eat Doug as a webcomic, and then it got picked up for newspaper syndication in 2006. And the plan had always been to expand, Sophie into graphic novels and into animation. But things a few years ago, I realized things weren't working well at the syndicate. There was a lot of, tell you one thing, do another.
Mm-hmm.
And you come to that point where you either say, I could try to fight them, which I didn't want to do, or you quit. And I didn't want to do either. So about 2 years ago, I just said, you know what? If I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do with Sophie, I'm going to have to do it myself. So I drew up the plan that included, these graphic novels, the ones you have right there, and animation, and kind of followed in the path of Snoopy. And things just started happening. Found a phenomenal publisher at Marble Press, who is, they're 200% behind the books, which was a kind of a new experience for me. And then I was pitching and marketing the animated show on my own too. So yeah, things just kind of started going really kind of quick. Finally.
Finally, yeah. Well, I mean, it's I have no creative, talent, so I can imagine, what you probably went through, and what a lot of people go through trying to do, stuff as basically create their own properties.
Yeah, it's one of those battles. You always hear that, the cliches of, the companies, messing with the artists and stuff like that. You just never think you're going to go through it yourself. And I had kept doing the strip, and I had put most of my focus on other publishing children's books and middle grade novels. But yeah, when it came time, I had to jump off the cliff. And it really came down to hearing from the readers of the comic strip. I'd always get letters. That was a nice thing I always loved about the strip and these books, is that they appeal to adults and kids. So you hear from kids that found out about the strip from their parents or their grandparents. But I got one letter from a kid. His mom sent me the comic that the kid had actually drawn himself after being inspired by the dog he did the newspaper comic strip. But it dawned on me, this kid who was probably 8, he had never held a newspaper. He didn't even know what a newspaper was, but he loved the comic, and he had found it because I had gone out and done my own ebook collections and stuff like that. So that was the final straw that made me say, what am I doing here? Why am I fighting the corporate side of things? And, it's that moment I think a lot of artists have gone through. You just never think you're going to go through it yourself, and you just got to sit down and say, okay, I'm going to make a plan, and then I'm going to follow through on that plan. And I'm forever grateful that I did.
So give us kind of an overview before we get into the specifics of the books of the Sophie character and the inspirations behind it.
Sophie was the inspiration. She was our first dog that I had when I was an adult. And at the time we got her, I was working on 2 other strips for development for syndication, and I didn't like either strip. And I didn't want to dedicate 10 years of my life to either one. And I was just kind of like, oh, maybe I'm just going to go do something else. And I took a break one day. I was just playing with Sophie. And literally, it was one of those moments you hear about. The entire concept of the strip popped into my head. And I sat down and just wrote about 100 strips, and then started doing it online, and then started submitting it for syndication. So it literally was one of those light bulb moments. And then 2 years after the strip launched, my son was born. So Doug, who I'd made up, all of a sudden I had a real baby boy. So the strip became a documentary. So all my reference for the art was in the house. So all the stuff you see in the strip. And then when we adopted our cats, they obviously went into the strip. Our foster dogs, all the foster dogs show up in the strips and also the graphic novels. So it was really kind of that balance of doing a documentary mixed with Snoopy and Calvin and Hobbes. But I always knew I was on the right track because I just got this in an email today, and it's my favorite compliment to get is people will write me and say, do you have cameras in our house?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because we've had dogs, and when I grew up, I had a dog, but he lived outside, and so when I got married and my wife had a dog already, then and the dog lived. It wasn't a problem for me because I enjoyed it, but it was like when my mom would come up to visit, she's like, "Why is the dog on the couch or the bed?" It's like, because that's his spot.
Yeah, so. That's the way it became, and it was one of those things where it was hectic having, our dogs, our cats, foster dogs. But when you have this outlet of this comic and now these graphic novels to use that as material, it keeps you going. There's endless material, but it also gave me a chance to shine a light on foster dogs and shelter dogs and certain types of dogs that have a bad rap. And not do it in a preachy way, not just get out there on Instagram and say, this is what you should do, and this is what dogs are really like. You show it you don't tell, you show by just creating characters like Annie, who's in the second volume, who's one of my real fosters and became one of the most popular characters. But then it becomes this thing where you're not preaching to them about foster dogs and shelter dogs. They're falling in love with them because of the characters that they are. So those stories come from the issues the dogs have. Some of the issues were severe, so you kind of tone it down, but there's one coming up. I think it might be in volume 3. It's about this foster. We had Luna, who had severe fear of humans. Like if you went near her, she curled up into a ball and peed, completely paralyzed. And we figured she was never going to get adopted. But she had a happy ending. I'm still in touch with her mom, so I get to see her life as it progresses. But yeah, her story makes it into the books now, as not as, ooh, look at how this foster dog turned around. You have a character, much like a lot of kids, that has a lot of anxiety, social anxiety and fears. And then how does that conflict with Sophie's personality. It doesn't obviously go well at first because she doesn't get that at all. So you get to have you get to have a heart to the story. It's not just silliness. Some of the stories are obviously imaginative, Calvin and Hobbes kind of silliness, but you keep that heart in there because it's based on real life.
Yeah. And I know that, the dogs we've had, aside from my wife her aunt got her a Labrador puppy from a breeder, but the other dogs that we've had, we've rescued, and probably one of our favorite ones was he was my dog, and his name was Odin because he only had one eye, and that didn't slow him down. But unfortunately, we lost him around the age of 2 suddenly, and so that kind of still hurts. But we have Kevin now, who you met earlier.
Yeah, it never gets easier, but that's the other.
And we lose them and say we're never going to do this again, and we do it again.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's also the other part of why I took the leap of coming up with a plan to really kind of just break out of that syndication, get away from that. Was that this is all I have left of my Sophie, so I could never not be doing something with Sophie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about the 2 books you have. The first is Sophie Jurassic Bark, and the other one is Frankenstein's Hound.
Yeah.
Tell me about those 2 books and just kind of the general, idea behind them.
The basic idea was that now I had these characters that I've been drawing and writing for 15 years. So it was easy in the sense that they were really alive to me. Now the challenge was you have a more open space of getting to tell a bigger story, and you can go kind of crazy and go wild. So it was a challenge of, what's this opportunity that I have? And the real opportunity was now it's kind of a reboot in a sense. So fans of the comic strip, it's not going to be rehashing anything for them. What you get to see now, especially for new readers, is Sophie's growth. So every book, she's growing and changing in the same way any kid would. She's going to go through, obviously in that first book, it's introducing Doug, the new baby. So she has that jealousy issues, problems with sharing and all that. And then you introduce the cats. There's always, it's really kind of a slice of life comic. But obviously she and Doug go on wild. They turn everything into some sort of imaginative adventure. And then you get to introduce the cats, where their adventures, where they're trying to take over the world, because that's how I imagine most cats are. Mm-hmm. Those are actually real. So when you have the adventures with the cats, they're actually trying to, use quantum physics and stuff to take over the world. But yeah, so Sophie grows with the reader, she's going to go through the same issues that kids go through. In the 4th book now, it's about her learning that there's this big, huge, scary world outside the fence. So that whole book is going to have a theme. And then each chapter, as crazy as they are, they still fit along her journey. So each one, whatever the theme is of that chapter, they fit with where she's at in her development and how she's dealing with the world around her. And the fun part is with her character, it's not always that, and we all learned our lesson, the end, happy day. It's the same thing you go through as a person growing up. You're still going to be frustrated. You're still going to have jealousy. You're still going to get angry. That's kind of the spark that keeps everything going. And it's also, I think, why parents like reading it with their kids. It's not a book you just hand off to the kid to go keep them occupied for a while. There's laughs in there for the adults. There's Doctor Who references. There's Game of Thrones references. There's, the stuff
There's a Batman.
Yeah, a lot of Batman. That was something I did in the comic strip, and I was not going to let that go. So you have fun with that. Like in Luna's story that's in book 3, Sophie tries to make Luna a superhero. And obviously she has severe anxiety problems. So obviously does not end well with her trying to be a superhero. So yeah, that's, I think, the real joy is hearing from people that read it together, parents reading it with their kids and stuff like that.
So there's two squirrels in there. Are they just? Do you have two pet squirrels?
No, those are, and I'll give you this here because I've never said it publicly because everybody always asks what's their names. They do have names. I never put them in the comic because it was my own inside joke. Those are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern from the Tom Stoppard play, which is my favorite Theater of the Absurd play. So that's why they're so, squirrels naturally are nuts. So for me, I always wanted characters that were called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and I had to put the squirrels in. So that's why they're my kind of Shakespearean clowns because they also break the fourth wall. So Sophie will talk to the reader at the beginning of the book. She introduces each book. You get to see the pictures of the real animals. But the squirrels, will sometimes break that fourth wall at the end of the book and talk to the readers. That's kind of a fun thing I got to do in this that I didn't really do in the comic strip, was have that kind of fun where you're not just opening a screen to a world, observing that world, but the characters are actually talking to you, interacting with you. So, yeah.
So, were there any challenges that you faced going from writing a cartoon strip to the graphic novel format? Because they are very different.
Yeah, there was a lot. I was very lucky to have my editor and my art director and the head of the publisher are like a team. So I'm constantly talking to them. That's been a godsend because, one was the rhythm. Even though my comic strip was a daily strip and I had continuous stories in the daily newspapers, you still had to do 4 panels with a beginning and a joke each time. So you have that rhythm. Learning to break that rhythm was tricky. You'll notice in the first book, it still kind of has that rhythm at the beginning. So it's almost like the comic strip a little bit. And then as it opens up, the stories become longer. So that was a challenge to learn that rhythm of writing. And the second one was because I could do these big stories and big splash pages and stuff. There were times where you lose sight of Sophie's character, her personality. It was like me being a kid taking over. And my editor would come, say, hey, Sophie wouldn't take this way. Why is she sitting down for this? And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. So I'd go back in. That's the other beautiful thing about you can go back in and rewrite the whole story. So it was always like working when you have your dog around you and they want attention. I had to be
which is why I'm muted right now because the dog thinks he needs to go. Meh.
Yeah, she's asking for it. That's exactly what it was like. And I was ignoring Sophie at times. So I had to realize, oh, no, this is not my show. This is her show. So I learned to take a back seat. I would come up with the premises and then just put the characters in there and see what they do. That was it. So it's like watching a movie in your own head.
So how long do you draw digitally or do you work digitally or how long does it take you to do? I mean, this is my favorite part of the Labradorian.
I prefer, like with the comic strip when I started it, I did, brush and pen, which is my preference. But the reality is of this amount of work, you got to work digital because I've had to rip out entire chapters, had to redo pages. And the other reality was I realized initially we were going to do the books black and white. And that's when I signed the deal with the publisher. That's what we were going to do. And then they were like, no, this should be color. And I knew I couldn't do it on my own. So I gladly hired a colorist. And that, to me, is my favorite part because now you get to see someone else's artistic abilities on your work. That's a lot of fun because they're so much better than me at coloring. So, yeah, that was a big part of learning because the writing takes the longest part, but now we've got it down where I can get the book written in a month or two. And that gives me time to rehash it. Drawing wise, now I can do anywhere from, depending on the pages, 2 to eight pages a day, depending on the pages.
Mm-hmm. I know that we've kind of talked. You make a lot of pop culture references. There's the Labradorian from The Mandalorian. Is there perhaps any properties that you would like to besides your own creator stuff? Is there any stories in any of the universes that you would like to have a shot at telling for a younger audience?
Yeah, my absolute dream, aside from drawing a peanut strip, but my absolute dream would be to do a project with the Henson Company.
Mm-hmm.
That would be to do something with Labyrinth, which is one of my all-time favorite properties of all. That would be, I know they've done a lot of mangas and comics, and I have them all. But yeah, my dream would be to do anything or something with Jim Henson. Even their Storyteller series, which is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I love those books. I love the comics that they did. Yeah, so that would be the ultimate goal, something with Henson.
So as we kind of wrap up here, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the books, or your process, or anything you may have learned while working on them?
I think the biggest thing that came out of this was that, especially as an artist, is to trust your instincts. When you realize it's like, you get what you think is the big break, which is like syndication. All of a sudden you're like behind this wall where you think, oh, leaving that would be bad for some reason. We're, kind of programmed like that coming up. But I think the newer generation is better at this, where you realize at some point you trust your gut, and you might have to take a leap of faith like this was. But do it. But draw up a plan. Don't just take the leap. Actually sit down, think it out, plan it out for years in advance, what you want to do, how you're going to go about each segment, and then just execute on that plan.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the big learning experience. And the other one is that never lose sight of the fun. There's a reason why, comic creators, we get into this. For me, at the end of the day, it was with this newspaper strip. It was, I've got your attention for 10 seconds. My goal for 10 seconds a day was to make you smile. That was it. And my only goal for this book was the same, was to, if I could get kids and parents laughing together at a book, that was it. That's all I ever really cared about. So yeah, I'm hoping so far, the responses I'm getting from parents is that that's what's happening. So yeah, I'm already kind of thrilled.
Well, I'll definitely let you know, what my son thinks about it, because he last year around this time, he was really big into Captain Underpants, and I think this is along the same kind of vein as those books, and that's a good thing, because it gets younger readers introduced to the medium.
Yeah, that's an important thing I tell parents all the time. I used to say comics are a gateway to reading. It was like a stepping stone to reading books, but now I don't say that anymore, because it's just as good as reading anything else. If it's a way to get your kid reading, then give them whatever comics they like, and that's one thing I was hopeful with these books, is that, one, it would obviously capture kids' hearts and get them attached to something. But I also wanted something that the parents then could be involved in. That they're seeing it from the parents' perspective in the books. That's their life too. So having that shared experience with a story is kind of the ultimate goal.
So kind of give us one, as we try to segue out of the interview. Not that, I would love to possibly have you back for a longer conversation when I'm not, when there's no time constraints. But give us because the books come out in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, October 15th will be out. Yep. And also, if you sign up for my newsletter, I'm going to have some special offers for those people too that are on my newsletter list that you can only get on there. So yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun.
And where can people find you on social media, or if you're on social media, the vast wasteland that it is?
I know. I'm mostly on Dog Eat Doug Comics on Instagram. And then dogeatdoug.com and brianandersonwriter.com go to the same site. But that's mostly what I do on there. And I post to Facebook. I don't scroll social media a lot, but I answer all the comments and all that stuff.
All right, and well, the one of the books is Sophie Jurassic Bark, and the other one is Sophie's Frankenstein's Hound, and they come out, like you said, in the next couple weeks. Everybody should check them out at your local comic store or independent bookstore. Let's support those people. And again, Brian, it was nice chatting with you, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, this was a blast, Chad. Thank you for having me. Yeah, anytime.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.